Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Dr. Janley Scaife. I teach ethnic studies at Sierra College, and I co-founded the Soaring Project with Professor Jackie Lowe at Miracosta College. She is zooming in virtually from San Diego as our virtual tech assistant. This is, again, the age that we are living in. So we started the Women Soaring Project as a way to honor and celebrate women who have often been ignored and overlooked in history. Each year, we select a theme under which we highlight the achievements of historical women. This year's theme is focusing on women politicians during a very highly anticipated presidential election. Hence, we are extremely excited to have Betty Yee here with us today to talk about Asian American women in politics as a celebration and bridge between Women's History Month in March and Asian American Pacific Islander Month in May. This event has been made possible through the endorsements from Sierra College's Gender Equity Committee and Sierra College's Empowering Asian Students, EASE community, and support from the Associated Students of Sierra College team, as well as the Asian American, Native American Pacific Islander, also known as the Anapeasy team. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge and give respect to the Indigenous community and land on which our college stands. We would like to start with the Sierra College acknowledgement, land acknowledgement. With respect, we acknowledge the Rockland campus of Sierra College as the traditional and unceded land of the Nishanan and Miwok peoples. The secret ravine known as Nishanan as Hoyoke is home to an ancestral village site protected for generations by local tribal nations and their members. Sierra College commits to an ongoing relationship with the United Auburn Indian community and other local tribes, and to respect the legacy of the first peoples of this land and their future generations, who are an integral part of the Sierra College community. So at this time, I would actually like to pass the microphone over to our amazing moderators for today's event, which includes Betty Chan, who's a lawyer and Sierra College professor of political science, and then Jocelyn Hernandez, Sierra College's Student Senate President and Student Trustee, as well as Johanna Vu, founder and co-president of Sierra College's first ever Empowering Asian Students Club.
So thank you, Professor Scaife. Hi, everyone. I'm Betty Chan, and I teach political science here at Sierra College. I was also involved with an initiative on campus called the Civic Engagement and Voter Empowerment Project that the entire campus was involved in. And we were in a nationwide college competition where Sierra College was awarded the Silver Seal for increasing the voting rate to 60 to 69% for the 2020 presidential election. So while voting is a critical part of democracy and our own self-expression, it also brings up the question, what is leadership? In a country where women are 50.4% of the population, we make up 28.2% of Congress, 32.9% of state legislatures, and 31.9% of statewide executive offices. So executive offices, statewide executive offices are the ones where the elected officials represent the whole state, like the governor, like the controller or treasurer. So not only are women underrepresented, but women of color have the extra challenge of combating erasure. How many of you have heard of the following Californians? March Fong Yu, the first Asian American in the US to win a statewide office. She was the California Secretary of State. So just to show up here, I'm just curious, how many of you have heard? Yeah. How many of you have heard of Yvonne Braithwaite Burke? She was the first African American from California to serve in Congress. And Gloria Molina, the first Latina to serve in the state legislature for California. So what does female leadership mean, and why does it matter? To explore this, it's an honor to introduce today's guest speaker, Betty Yee, who is a trailblazer. She was the first woman of color to be elected to California State Controller. Prior to that, she was on the Board of Equalization, the nation's only elected tax commission. Today, Betty is making history again as the first ever Asian American woman to be running for California governor. Holding these elected offices is no small feat, especially given that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders make up 6.6% of the US population, but only 0.9% of elected representatives. Seemingly undaunted by the lack of representation, Betty continues to pave the way for women. Where did she get this courage from? Early on, she was a caring problem solver for her parents who didn't speak English. At the age of 8, Betty began managing the books at the family dry cleaners, dealing with suppliers and banks. If the family came up short, they got by with less food. From this, she learned that when things are out of balance, too many communities are left to fend for themselves and sometimes are left behind. Betty put herself through UC Berkeley, where she earned her BA in sociology and a master's of public administration at Golden Gate University. During her junior year, her father was stricken with kidney failure. Betty became his advocate and helped him to navigate the healthcare system. This experience solidified her support for universal healthcare. Betty became a leading voice in public health, working on issues such as HIV/AIDS, domestic violence, mental health, elder care, and health disparities among low-income women. This was the beginning of her remarkable 40 years in public service. Whether working for an elected official or serving as an elected official, Betty is inclusive, lifting others up as much as possible. For example, as Governor Davis's budget director, she helped to establish a minimum wage for home care workers. As a member of the Board of Equalization, she helped to make the tax code more fair for working families and stood up to multinational corporations to make sure that they paid their fair share in taxes. She helped reform the tax code to allow same-sex couples to file joint state income tax returns, and this was foundational to the key US Supreme Court case on marriage equality. As the state controller, Betty managed to manage the finances for California, the world's 5th largest economy. So California is unique, and we have a what's called a plural executive branch. So this means that statewide executive offices, like the controller, are elected by the people. They're not appointed by the governor. So it means that the controller and other offices in the plural executive branch are equal to the governor. It's just that they have different roles. So in carrying out her roles, she was accountable and transparent. She uncovered $7.3 billion in mismanaged spending by the state and local governments. She forced life insurance companies to pay death benefits to surviving families rather than letting the insurance companies pocketing that money for themselves. And she protected thousands of jobs during COVID by working with the governor to keep the state's ports from going into debt. She also spearheaded the foster youth tax credit to aid current and former foster youth. So Betty's policies and actions demonstrate that she wants Californians to thrive. As the controller, she also chaired a commission, and on that commission, they prioritized the long-term health of our ocean, our marine resources, and our coastal resources. That commission emphasized tribal engagement and environmental justice. So today she's on the board of a national nonprofit that works with investors and companies to accelerate actions that address climate risks. As women, we redefine and shape politics by bringing our skills, talents, and what speaks to us. And Betty has done exactly that. So in our conversation with Betty Yee today, we're very excited to have the following Sierra College scholars helping to moderate the student-led conversation. So Jocelyn Hernandez, the first undocumented ASSC president and student trustee at Sierra College, overcame challenges from her birthplace in Oaxaca, Mexico, to Roseville, California. Facing adversity as an undocumented student, she excelled academically, graduated early from high school, and embarked on a transformative journey at Sierra College. Despite setbacks due to DACA suspension, Jocelyn's determination led her to avenues like AB 540, enabling her pursuit of higher education. Majoring in political science, she holds leadership roles and actively advocates for undocumented students. Jocelyn's activism extends to supporting AB 680 at the state capitol, emphasizing resilience and perseverance for fellow undocumented students. Jocelyn is also currently serving as a committee member of the League's ACES committee and is a part of the Association of Community College Trustees. Her story embodies the transformative power of education and determination to overcome adversities. Once she completes her AA degree, Jocelyn's plan is to pursue a bachelor's degree, followed by a master's, and eventually attend law school. She's not stopping there. She intends to return and serve as a trustee on the board of trustees, giving back to the community that supported her growth and provided her with the opportunities for higher education. We also have Johanna Vu, who is the founder and co-president of Sierra College's Empowering Asian Students Club. Johanna identifies as a first-generation and low-income student and daughter of Vietnamese American refugee parents. Navigating uncharted waters, she's gone on to gain experience in advocacy, having conducted research under Stanford Medicine faculty and its respective Office of Diversity in Medical Education. Johanna focused on immigrant health metrics surrounding Hep B or hepatitis B and PTSD in the Southeast Asian community. Most recently, she took to the US Capitol in a march with the ASSC Senate team to lobby at the national level for the protection of deferred action for childhood arrivals, Pell Grant expansion, and the Higher Education Act, all policies that directly impact community college students across the country. As a second-year student graduating with 3 associate degrees, sociology, social and behavioral sciences, and arts and cultures, Johanna hopes to transfer to a 4-year university next fall on the pre-medical track to attain a bachelor's of sociology, to pursue a postgraduate education and earn a master's in public health and an MD. With this, her ultimate goal is to one day practice medicine through compassion and culturally conscious care that is informed by looking at the intersectionality of patient identities as a foundation. Johanna is consistently looking to make changes both in the Sierra College community and beyond, to further emphasize that the relationships between policy, civic engagement, science, social activism, and humanities are integral to our rapidly evolving society in the rising generation of young change makers. So at this time, we're going to let Jocelyn and Johanna delve into their questions for Betty, and we'll be leaving the last 15 to 20 minutes of this event for a Q&A session with the audience. In the meantime, we invite the Zoom audience to engage in the chat section and also in the Q&A section. We love seeing the digital interaction in Zoom as well. So handing over the discussion to our amazing campus student scholars.
Thank you, Betty. Betty, Betty Yee for taking your busy schedule and coming with us and sharing your personal experience and knowing that as a leader yourself and as a woman of color, breaking barriers and being here, knowing that us as students can relate to you so much. I just want to say a huge thank you. My first question is, as an Asian American woman in politics, what career areas have you considered or accomplished over time that has led to you where you are today?
Oh, great, thank you. First of all, thank you for the warm welcome to Sierra College. I love this campus. This is not my first time here, definitely will not be my last time here, but I'm looking out at this beautiful audience of people from all different backgrounds and to our virtual audience as well. So really appreciate being here. You know, when I think about my career trajectory, it really was unplanned in so many ways. So much of what I have charted in terms of my own path to leadership and to what I am doing now is really from my early days serving as an advocate for my immigrant parents. And I tell this story because this is it's such a common immigrant experience, but I tell it really with the idea in mind that everything that we do in our life has value. Has value in terms of how it forms your foundation, has value in terms of how it just really gives you opportunities to reach into areas that you likely would not have consciously decided to go into on your own. And as Professor Chan talked about, my early background in terms of being a caregiver for my father, but even before then, with their laundry and dry cleaning business in San Francisco, that was their foothold into being able to provide a livelihood for their families. And when you have a family business, the children oftentimes are the best employees, and I got paid really handsomely for that. But it was probably one of the best experiences I've had in my life. People always ask me, "What's the best job that you've had, throughout your life?" And that I will say was probably the best. It gave me an insider view about just what it takes to run a business, the interactions and responsibilities that I had representing my parents. You instantly become an advocate when your parents don't speak English. And it was really at a very, I was 13 years old when I had a pivotal moment in my relationship with my parents, where they had actually asked me to address a public body. And it was the board of the San Francisco Unified School District. My little sister was going to be bused across the city of San Francisco as part of the school desegregation program. And as I always tell the story, I'm happy I'm sitting down because I was 13 years old when I was asked by the 4 Chinese American families on the west side of San Francisco to address the local school board. All of the Chinese American families had small businesses. A couple were in the restaurant business. There was another dry cleaning business owner. And the local elementary school where my sister was going to school was within walking distance from the business. And the statement I was asked to make by the 4 families, and we weren't the only 4 families opposed to the busing program, essentially was this: please don't continue with implementing the busing program. We all are small business owners. We really appreciate that our elementary school for our children is within walking distance. But if we have to think about any one of our children becoming ill or emergency should arise, none of us drive. And so we would have to shut down our business, lose a day of livelihood, and be on public transportation for well over 2 hours to bring our child home. I made that statement, but the part of the statement that I reflect on now that I thought was quite responsible was they had asked me to say, use the money that you have put aside for the busing program to improve the quality of all the schools in the city. I made that statement at the age of 13. I was so nervous. I had never spoken before a public body before. I went back to my seat, and the busing program lasted the better part of the next 30 years. Nothing happened to my sister. Everything was fine. But it was this whole idea that here was a policy that could provide, that could actually create some financial hardship for people. And so I spoke up for the families at that time. And that one experience has stayed with me to this day. That I was an advocate for someone, that I was a voice for someone. And, what is politics but, really that? Yes, it's a little bit of all the ugliness you read about in the newspaper, but for it to really be a vehicle for change, it is about really having all the voices represented that can help us really put policies in place and create change that can have broad public benefit. And so when I continued to be involved in school and at Cal Berkeley, I was not in student government at Cal, but certainly was throughout high school. And this whole notion of advocacy just continued to stay with me. I always looked at where were communities not represented, and how could we be sure that those voices were, included with every decision that we made. And of course, what is the most important decision that you can make when you're in a decision-making role, whether you're in student government, whether you're in an advisory committee, whether you're on a commission, whether you're in an elected office. And those are decisions related to the allocation of resources, particularly financial resources. I took care of the books for my parents' laundry and dry cleaning business. And so I had a facility with numbers for sure. But when you actually put that in a frame of, how do those numbers translate in terms of people's lives? And so when you asked about a career, Jocelyn, I would say that I really didn't have a typical career. It was really always looking for where can I serve that would really try to have an opportunity to fashion policies that would help just uplift all communities. And that started at 13, and it continues to be how I view governing today in my respective roles. But the emphasis that I really did hone on was this whole idea of really becoming financially savvy, being fiscally savvy, because this is where the fights happen. This is where the disagreements happen. I think we all can agree about a vision for California in terms of what we want our future to look like. And I would venture to say, even in a diverse room like this and online, that we could all really agree about what we want our future to look like. How we get there, there will be lots of debate and lots of disagreements about how we get there. Do we raise taxes? Do we not? Do we look at providing more additional supports for communities that have been underserved, or don't we? And what are some of the legal hurdles in terms of doing that? But really, the financial fiscal policies that are made really can be what shapes the ability for communities to have opportunities, and whether those opportunities grow over time or whether they become hampered over time. And so I really did my best to get as well versed in fiscal and financial policy as much as possible. It brought me to Sacramento in the 1980s. I was on a local public health commission dealing with the whole HIV/AIDS crisis when that began. And public health was ill-equipped to deal with what we had to do in terms of just basic outreach and education to the public about HIV/AIDS. And at that time, we knew very little about what that disease was about. But over time, we learned more. And so how we could get more money for local county public health to begin to work with community-based organizations to get this type of information and education out to all of our diverse communities in California. So I was asked to come to Sacramento to figure out how to get some additional public health dollars back for, I was living in Santa Cruz County at the time, for Santa Cruz County. And when I came to Sacramento in the 80s, I was quite appalled at how underrepresented staff members were who advised legislators about fiscal policy. Pretty much older white men. And I thought, how could this be? We live in such a diverse state. We have so many different needs and demands on our dollars. And so I applied for a fellowship with the California State Senate, served in that role, but instantly just was gravitating towards the fiscal budget work. And that has always been, kind of my strength, and continued into what the work that I just finished doing as your state controller for 8 years. But I think just having always, kind of the hand on the pulse of our fiscal and financial resources is so key, because those are finite and they're going to become much more constrained, as we're seeing today, as we're talking about a budget deficit for California. And so the decisions about how we continue to serve the needs of all of our communities in California under those conditions really compels us to think about, finances differently. Yes, there are set processes and ways to think about a budget, but in terms of how we serve all of the needs of Californians, to be sure that we're not missing any communities who have specific needs. This is the kind of background that I really felt like was needed. So I would say fiscal and financial background. And I would say to all of you here, no matter what area or arena you go into, get that experience under your belt. It will serve you well.
Thank you. And thank you so much for responding to our, curiosity of how, your inkling into your career has, stemmed from. And I would just like to touch upon what you mentioned earlier about sort of your earliest beginnings in an immigrant home. What was your landscape of identity like from childhood, growing up specifically in the San Francisco Bay Area as the daughter to Chinese American immigrants?
Yes, yeah, it's a interesting question, because while I just share my experience that I believe is a common immigrant experience about the role of children in immigrant families, I think for me it was a unique upbringing, and unique from the perspective that my parents, my father came over at a very young age, apprenticed in the laundry business in San Francisco, and actually his path to becoming a citizen became naturalized by enlisting in the United States Army and serving in active duty during World War II. A very common path to citizenship back then. And here today, we're having all kinds of debates about, immigration and, legal status and all that. But if we actually look back to history, many, many pathways that people, were able to become citizens. I think for me, I was fortunate because I grew up in a community on the west side of San Francisco where my father and my mother decided to open their own business among many other immigrant communities. And many of them were immigrants from Europe, from the Middle East, and we had a couple of families who were from Mexico. But back then, it was very much a community where we supported one another. The identity that I had was, yes, a daughter of immigrants, and it wasn't a shameful thing. I would say that for some people, there's a shame associated with being an immigrant, which I think just needs to be addressed pretty early on, because there's a richness that you bring to your communities as a result of being from an immigrant family. And but I think where where I felt it was different growing up at that time was that the whole notion of community and being supported by the community was just so strong, and it really shaped my own identity about becoming really kind of a strong member of my own community as I grew up. This was a time where we all helped out. My four sisters and brother helped out with the family business. Not only did we have to bring home great report cards from my parents, but like for all their customers as well. So it was just like a lot of accountability, right? That I was around. But it was also a time where I did not feel an ounce of discrimination. It was a time where if anybody in our community was really having a tough time, and this was predominantly an Irish Catholic neighborhood where I grew up. If anybody in our neighborhood or community was having a particularly hard time or struggling, we all rallied around that family. And I remember vividly my next door neighbor, the O'Malleys. They had a son who was my age, who was killed in a motorcycle accident, at a very young age, and we all just rallied with them. I mean, didn't matter that my parents didn't speak English, but it was the thing to do. It's what we did. This was what community meant. And it wasn't until I went into junior high school, not even the beginning of junior high school, but junior high school and then into high school, that I really did begin to feel kind of like an other. That there were, people from other parts of San Francisco kind of now coming into the school environment. And there definitely was, kind of a class issue. And I would say not so much from a ethnic identity issue, but I would say from a class issue. Definitely felt like, I was, if your parents were in business for themselves, you definitely belonged to kind of a lower tier class of San Franciscans. And so that became a little bit of part of my identity. But then when I went to Lowell High School, we were all trying to get into the best college, and it wasn't the pressure cooker of a high school that it is today in San Francisco. But when I was there, I felt like it kind of equalized again. We were all there for a similar purpose. And so, we were studying hard. We all wanted to get into a good college, and I felt there was, kind of like a community of just kind of, like-minded, like purpose, drive in terms of what all of us were there to do. And so, but I would say my junior high school years really was the first time that I felt any kind of discrimination. It's the first time that I actually had somebody call me by a slur. And then certainly in my adult years, that became a much more regular encounter. So, yeah, but very different growing up in terms of back in the 60s in the west side of San Francisco. Just community meant something, and I hope we can get back to that.
For the next question, how was your undergraduate degree in sociology and master's of public administration been actively applied to your time throughout your 40-year career?
Yeah, this is a great question. Yeah, I mean, we read about a lot today with young people, and I'm so glad to see all of you here, but so many of your peers are actively thinking about foregoing college, right? And bad mistake. I hope that they will think twice and many times over before they make that decision. It helped a lot. It helped a lot. First of all, let me just say, my parents had no aspirations for any of their children to go to college. They couldn't afford to put us through college. In fact, my father at the time, because I have four sisters and one brother, my brother's the youngest, he would tell all of his daughters two things that you need to remember in life. One, have a strong handshake when you shake somebody's hand. And two, look people in the eye when you're speaking to them. And I think, and because he felt that we were going to be out there, in the work world, where there was no place for us in college. His idea of success for all of his daughters was, graduate from high school, become a secretary somewhere, marry somebody who's going to take care of you, and your life will be fine. I will say that all of the daughters in his family kind of didn't subscribe to that. I give praise to my older sister. She's just 8 years older. She actually was born in China. But she paved the way in terms of college. And I think for her, it was really to get away. There was a lot of pressure on her as being the oldest daughter. But she was able to go to Cal. She lived at home when she went to Cal, but went away to school for professional school. And but she paved the way, and we all did well at school. And so why not? I mean, we wanted to do something with our lives, and we wanted to, just really have options in terms of careers and how we, and more importantly, how we were going to give back. And so uh, I think for me, the degrees and why I chose sociology was because I was just very curious about the world around me. I was very good at math in high school. I took AP math, very good at English, arts, but there was just something about sociology. I really wanted to learn how to live life among people who are different from me. And sociology helped me do that. It helped me gain an appreciation about, how to be more accepting of people, and that everyone has value and that everyone has something to contribute. And you look at, just all the things that you study in sociology, whether it's deviant behavior to, looking at, how you look at, communities that tend to gravitate towards, their own, and kind of, how that becomes a value, but really over time, not so. So, you learn about all that. Now, going to Berkeley, I will say too, it was a time where Berkeley attracted people, and they still do, but less so, I think, from all over the world. So I really did feel like people always ask me, "What did you learn at Cal?" And I said, "I learned how to live life." But sociology had a very big influence on my life in terms of my relationship to people generally. And then in graduate school, so I was going to go to the policy school at Berkeley. As Professor Chan said, my father became ill when I was a junior, and so really had to be back and take care of him. And he was on dialysis for 5 years, and eventually passed away at the young age of 63. And we had just kind of few opportunities. All of my sisters, we all came home and we just took part in taking care of him during that time. So it was a bit of a sacrifice. So I decided to go to Golden Gate University, and I did the night program and got my master's in public administration. In hindsight, I am so grateful that I did that. It was a program at the time that was just getting fully accredited, which meant that they were experimenting a lot. And when they were experimenting a lot, we had all kinds of people gravitate towards Golden Gate University. And I had classes with people who were involved in the Watergate scandal, high-level cabinet officials. I had practitioners who had run, big cities. I had police chiefs. And it was a wonderful combination of both theory and practice with respect to public administration. And I felt so equipped when I received my master's to be able to really be in the public sector. And I had already been in the public sector a bit, just navigating things from my parents. So understood kind of the workings of government, but now to actually serve in it, I felt I had the best, mentors and advisors and obviously instructors at Golden Gate. So it helped a lot. My finance passion was really honed when I was in graduate school. At the time, it was just a few years after Prop 13 was passed here in California, which capped the local property tax to 1% of assessed value. And it meant that local governments were not going to have all the resources that they had been used to having, because prior to Prop 13 passing to cap the local property tax rate, essentially within a county, every local government could just set their budget based on how much the property tax needed to be ratcheted up to generate the revenue to support their services. And the big issue with Proposition 13 was that the anti-tax groups felt like homeowners were going to be taxed out of their homes if we kept ratcheting that property tax rate up. So as a result, I did a lot of case studies around what happened to local governments after the passage of Proposition 13, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But really also what happened to state government, and state government took on a lot more of the responsibilities in terms of funding our public education system, in terms of sending more money back down to local governments because their property tax rate had been capped, then also passing laws that allow local governments to raise other revenue as well. And so we see kind of now this patchwork of just a lot of different revenue sources trying to finance everything. And by the way, I need to mention, today is tax day. I would hopefully all of you who have filing requirement or payment requirement have filed and paid today. You can still pay today, but the filing you can get an extension for, but don't, those penalties and interest rack up. But I mention that because we are here at Sierra College, a beautiful public community college campus that is in great part funded by property tax. So these are the things that we want to continue to support. So I felt like my degrees really were spot on to what we do. But I will also say that it doesn't matter, because it's what I kind of did with the time that I was studying for this. You will find just avenues about how you hone your specific interests. So you could be in a major, but still find ways to really connect up, getting fiscal and financial expertise. You can look at how you need to do public service, no matter what your background is. You can look at how you do civic engagement, regardless of what your degree is. And so I just encourage all of you to look for those avenues as you're continuing your studies.
And thank you. And I just really love hearing your interdisciplinary approach and weaving your way slowly into politics and policy. And so I would just like to touch back onto sort of the sociology element.
Yeah.
How has your lived experience with challenges such as language barriers, cultural assimilation, and socioeconomics unique to your story shaped your decision to take on the campaign trail at large, and connecting that to the needs of the public across a multitude of diverse identities beyond your own here in California?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a big question, actually. And to me, it's kind of the central question of how to do politics today. And let me unpack that a bit. When I think about kind of what's at stake in elections, right? And this is not going to be a political discourse by any means here, but you hear a lot about how our democracy is at stake, right? And what does that really mean? What does that really mean? And to me, the biggest thing about democracy that is so beautiful about why people look to the United States, why people look to here, to California especially, is that we really are a society that values democracy because it honors fundamental freedoms. And I think as a result of that, it honors really how we protect the health and well-being of each and every one of us. And health and well-being broadly defined. And so when I think about your question, Johanna, it's to me, there's so many things that are coming at us that would suggest that people want to have power by dividing us. And let's face it, division is very profitable in certain segments of our society. I would say media is probably a big one right now. So I think as a result, we have to think about politics differently. And that is, how do we look at it in terms of, yes, it is the cornerstone of a good democracy is when we can have the broadest public engagement possible. When we can have, election integrity, when we can have, voting rights really upheld, when we can have, just all these things that are such hallmarks of what a strong democracy is. And so when I say your question defines what politics should be today, it means that we're going to look at how we run elections very differently. We're going to go to where communities are, not the other way around. We're not going to assume that people have the ability to get information as freely as they once were. We know that voting rights are under attack in other parts of this country, and actually they're under attack here in California in the form of misinformation. And I will say that communities of color, ethnic communities, and immigrant communities are the biggest targets. And so I take it upon myself as a public official, but more importantly as a member of a ethnic community, to really do my part to be sure that information is disseminated in ways that people can consume and understand and know how it applies to them. I also take it upon myself to be sure that when we are talking about just how we look at our politics, that no community should be sitting any of this out. How do we look at really getting communities engaged and involved by speaking to the issues that matter to them? And this is really tough. because I think if you speak to politicians generally, of which I am one, um, it is about kind of solving the problem of the day. It's like solving the problem of what's in front of you. And that's fine. But we also should really be thinking about long-term implications. We should be thinking about unintended consequences. We should be thinking about are these policies ones that really help us really recognize that they are for the greater public good. And particularly in my field, in my wheelhouse, with financial and fiscal resources being so scarce, are they the best policies given our, fiscal and financial situation? And are we bringing all of the tools that we have around us to play in terms of being sure that all communities can benefit from these policies? So it's a different way of looking at politics where we are outward focused rather than hoping that people will pay attention and join, politics. It's a lot more work. And so when I think about campaigns and how we look at how people campaign, the typical way of campaigning is you go out, you make you introduce yourself, you're a candidate, you're going to run for this office, you know a little bit about the office you're running for. So you talk about what the responsibilities of the office are. But the really traditional way of running a campaign is then you go and raise money, raise a ton of money. At the level that I've been running, you raise a ton of money. You eventually go on TV or radio, and you hope that you get the most votes. So it's just kind of amassing money, buying media, getting your message out, and you hope to win votes. I'm much more of an on-the-ground campaigner, always have been. And I will tell you, campaign consultants hate me because they can't make any money off of me. Because I will use the media, but I'm going to use ethnic media. I'm going to use radio. I'm going to use all the means that we can to know and understand that different communities get their information differently. And so being very granular about that, because you've got to engage people on terms that they can understand, that they are going to feel comfortable with, where they feel that they are going to be heard and seen in a way that is trusted, that we are not taking advantage of them, that we really have a genuine interest in what their needs and concerns and issues are. And this is a very, very different way of campaigning. It is the campaign that I feel most comfortable with. I think for anyone who is from a background like mine or from an ethnic community, I hope that is the most comfortable way to campaign. And I will tell you, it is the most rewarding way to campaign for me. You learn so much. You can be engaged in dialogue like this, whether it's an audience of, I've had audiences of 4 all the way up to an audience of 500, and we will have the same kind of engagement because it's meaningful to people, and we get to share, experiences that we have in common, but I also get to learn about experiences that I'm not even aware of that people have had. And it informs the work that I do. It informs the policies I'm going to be involved in. It informs my perspective about how well the state of California is doing. One of the things about being controller of the state was that I got to see really from that unique perch how well the economy is doing for all Californians. And probably more importantly, how well it's not doing, how really it's not meeting the needs of Californians. But more importantly, how well California as a state government's response to those communities that aren't doing well is doing. And I will tell you, we have a long ways to go. We have a long ways to go. And the biggest piece of this is how do we engage the communities that really are feeling the most pressing needs in the biggest ways to be a part of the decision-making process. So it's essential that I'm going to just take a quick poll. How many of you are registered to vote? Excellent. And those of you who are not, you don't need to raise your hand, but you still have time before the general election in November. Please do vote, register to vote and vote. So it is different now. And I may be an outlier with respect to this. And frankly, as a woman running, okay, and I'll just end with this. As a woman running, one of the goals that I have, particularly as a woman candidate at the statewide level, is I want to change the rules of the game. I don't want to be measured like the guys, right? I mean, and the way you're measured is, well, how much money have you raised? And what's your network look like? And where are your big donors? In all of my campaigns, I've raised enough. Am I going to have personal wealth put into a campaign? Hell no. Am I going to raise enough to get my message out and be a credible candidate? Yes. But augmenting that is being on the ground, being in every community in the state to let people know why their engagement matters. And so I think for women, we bring different things to the table. Our networks aren't as vast by virtue of the fact that we haven't been, in the workforce and in our professions for as long a period of time as many of our male counterparts. I also think that we undervalue the experience that we have had in our lives as parents, as community leaders, as advocates in so many different ways in our families, in our communities, in the spaces that where we are. That those are exactly the skills that we need in terms of how we're going to tackle the challenges of today. Because you're bringing that community perspective, you're bringing that kind of lens of lived experience to decision making. So I would like to change the rules of the game. I'm hoping that I can kind of pave that as I become a candidate, continue to be a candidate statewide, because I do believe that we can have more diverse candidates and more diverse representation if we do that. I mean, you talk about how much money you have to raise for a campaign. You've already shut the door in the face of so many communities that don't have any aspiration of serving a decision-making role. And that should not be the case. We should be opening those doors, and we should be valuing the experience and the talent that we have coming through those doors from all communities.
Thank you for answering that question with, the grounds of you want to change the game and you want to be sort of the troublemaker in terms of campaigning. And so I would like to hand it off to Jocelyn on her question.
Thank you. Seeing how politics and policies be made and how we can see it through your eyes and seeing it from a different perspective and showing our underrepresented populations that they're not alone and they stand within you and you're representing shows your leadership and accountability into taking your words and putting them into action. Yeah. So really appreciate that. Also, given the low percentage of both women and Asian Americans in policies, how was your personal experience knowing that the percentage was low?
My personal experience, oh gosh, I will say it was a driving force. It's like, it shouldn't be this low. Oh my gosh, got to change this, right? So, it's interesting kind of what motivates different people to do things. But for me, I mean, there's just, I don't want people who look different from me to be making policies affecting me, for the long term. I mean, I just think it's kind of as fundamental as that, right? So when you look at the electorate in California, and when you look at who the high propensity voters are in California, it's still older white male. That's the demographic. Show up every single election, true in both parties. That is the reliable demographic. But you know what? They're making decisions about who's going to be representing us, for you, for me. And I'm not sure that those are necessarily the decisions that are going to be the right ones over the long term. And I just think it was a driving force for me to actually put my hat in to run for office. I just couldn't stand it anymore, frankly. When I ran for the tax board, so we have the nation's only elected tax commission, and my wheelhouse, finance, tax, all of that. So I felt very qualified to serve in this role. But I ran in kind of an unusual way. So I succeeded a woman who was going to only serve out half her term on the tax board, representing the coastal district. So the Board of Equalization, 5 districts, equally divided by population. At that time, I represented 9 million Californians from the Oregon border down to Santa Barbara along the coast, including the entire San Francisco Bay Area, that came east to Yolo County, but not Sacramento. And when I decided to run for the seat, actually I became the acting member when she left office. So under California law, if you're a chief deputy to a constitutional officer, and at the Board of Equalization seats are constitutional offices, when that office becomes vacant, the chief deputy ascends to serve out the remainder of the term as the acting member or the acting officer. However, the governor can nominate someone to fill that spot, but that nomination has to be ratified by a majority of both houses of the legislature. So when my predecessor left the tax board, people immediately assumed that I was going to be, taking her spot. And I thought, well, I actually just wanted to help her. She was a friend of mine, get staffed up and to help her in terms of the policies and getting her briefed. And I wasn't thinking about staying there long, but there was speculation that I would be running for her seat. I had no intentions of running for office. This was not a teenage dream of mine at all. I had no aspirations of any of that. I just wanted to be an advocate. I wanted to, just represent people who didn't have a voice. But I looked at who was interested in running for this seat and actually getting the governor's nomination. all white male. I actually had to lobby on an issue at the Capitol. And I saw a couple of them actually speak on the floor of their respective house. They were all sitting legislators. And I thought, oh my goodness, they know nothing about taxes. They know nothing about this arena. I know more and I work in this arena, so I think I need to do this. And so I did. I ran my first race. It was all fine. And at that time, the Board of Equalization was also a tax appeals body. So we actually heard tax appeals against the state of California by a member quasi-judicial body. I loved that work. And I loved it because even a small business owner who didn't have legal representation could come and argue their case before us. It was also a way that we could see how well the tax code was working for Californians. And it's such an outdated tax code that I always look for opportunities to update it so that it could actually be workable for people who had to comply with it. So it was a very different body at the time. But I just really am always frustrated when the representation of our decision-making bodies aren't reflective of our communities. Because it says to me that our voices truly aren't being fully heard. And so to pursue this, it was really a driving force.
Thank you so much for giving your personal experience and knowing that there's not a lot of women into like these big roles as representatives, senators, and thank you.
Definitely.
And speaking into your experience and saying that a lot of these roles that people are representing are not representative of women specifically, we'd like to ask, what are common disparities do American women currently face in their lived experiences regarding reproductive health, maternal health, and childcare that are hugely prevalent in your driving mission as a woman running for office? And how would you plan to navigate reform to ensure that women's rights are protected in your time potentially as governor?
Yeah, thank you. Lots of issues affecting women, frankly. I think we definitely have evolved with respect to, the role of women, in society, and that I'm grateful for. You look at, as Professor Chan talked about, just representation of women in society, in our electorate. Also, the numbers of women, I think now are outpacing, or the percentage of women who are graduating from our colleges and universities are outpacing men. So you just see kind of this, kind of strong, hold of, women being present. But there are still barriers. And the barriers to me are ones where women still are not fully realizing their economic potential and their earnings potential. And a lot of that still has to do with, just hurdles about, traditional roles that women play. I think assumptions about women not being able to chew gum and walk at the same time, which we have demonstrated since the beginning of time we can do. And I think a lot of these policies now that really are trying to put restrictions on, access to supports that women, need. Whether it's around having healthy childcare and elder care systems, whether it's about having access. And here in California, we're very lucky. We've enshrined in our Constitution access to reproductive health care, including contraceptives. And so, all those things that really are factors in terms of a woman deciding how much and when to be full participants in our workforce and in our economy. And to me, that piece of it is still not fully realized by women. And I think we're going to make a lot of headway in terms of being sure that we're tearing down those hurdles. It's becoming very clear that the next economic burden that will become a crisis in California, because we have an aging population, will be what happens to caregiving responsibilities. This primarily lands on the shoulders of women, particularly women of color. They make up the predominant majority of caregivers. We undervalue that work so that many households that actually house caregivers live in poverty. And so this is something we do have to change. We have to put more value in terms of who our caregivers are, but more importantly, where are those supports that we can put in place now so that the decision doesn't have to come down to any Californian having to decide, I have to leave the workforce completely to be able to take care of an elderly loved one or a child with needs. And so those are the things that I think a women's lens really brings a lot of really interesting perspectives. we should be reviewing our leave policies. We should be reviewing our unemployment insurance programs, our safety net programs, to be sure that we are building resilience in each of those programs as much as possible. And as it relates to unemployment insurance, I think the days that certainly I enjoyed of being in careers for, 15, 20, 25, 30 years now are a thing of the past. People are going to be working in more jobs and transitioning a lot more because the economy will be evolving at that speed. And so we have to be at the ready for that. And what does that mean in terms of worker resilience? That we have programs that are like apprenticeships across all of our sectors, that we have like basically earn to learn opportunities across all sectors, that we have leave policies that actually can be there when you are transitioning from work to a different, maybe in a different field, that can support you while you're upskilling or reskilling. So these are the kinds of things that we can look at in advance and have them in place to be supports, and I think will be tremendously helpful for women because one, they'll be designed by women and being informed by the women experience, but also I think as women are still the ones that predominantly make household spending decisions and also are the ones who tend to give back more of their earnings into communities, this is critical. It's critical that we have a gender lens on this because it will mean that we're going to be seeing communities continue to be supported, uplifted, as long as we are elevating women into positions that are, paying more than a living wage, recognizing the value that they bring to jobs, helping to just crack those ceilings in corporate America too, about how women can continue to ascend in leadership in the private sector is key as well. And I've been doing a lot of work in corporate for diversity. These are the things that we have to focus on as matters of policy, because all our communities in general benefit and society in general definitely benefits.
Thank you for honing in on the conversation, how like this glass ceiling, economics is so heavily tied into gender roles here. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Jocelyn on the next question.
So after if you want to go and ask the question, we could do Q&A.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Johanna. As our current governor, has the tax, I'm not going to ask the question.
Yeah.
It came up to mind, but recently we went to the state capitol to advocate how our current governor is cutting down our financial aid for all college students and California community college system and at the CSU system. How, as our future governor, how are you able to be able to support us college students to pursue higher education?
Yeah. Well, let me just say, as someone who wouldn't be sitting here but for public education and higher education, it has to remain a priority. And it is one where there's a lot of work that needs to be done in how education can continue to serve, all of our needs here in California. That'd be the last place I would cut, frankly, especially when we are experiencing a budget deficit and probably a stagnant, economy going forward with respect to job growth. And then all of the things that are going to be happening with respect to work, the future of work. We are so far behind in terms of workforce preparedness. One of the areas that I'm really delving into a lot is the whole issue of AI, and it's here with us. And many people like to focus on the negatives of AI, and they are there. But my big fear is from an equity perspective that AI could again leapfrog many of our underserved communities, like the internet did, to where we're catching up later, and there will be missed economic opportunities. So I would really like to see that whole conversation be about, where are the benefits, and I want to invest, frankly, in community college to be the place where we develop kind of AI literacy. I mean, this is in our lives. It's not just in education and workforce, it's in our lives. And so how do we create kind of an overall, kind of AI literacy around what it is, how it's affecting our lives, how it's already in our lives, where are the benefits and opportunities in terms of what it can do to improve our lives and improve learning, and then look at or concurrently look at what are the guardrails that we need to have to be sure that it is not really a place where we're going to see a lot of promotion of misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, security issues about, privacy and confidentiality. I mean, all those things that we know that can happen. But I'm more for, let's look at the benefits and let's look at really anchoring kind of this AI literacy in our education system now, so that we are not having to catch up later on, particularly with communities that are going to be potentially left behind. So education, always a priority. I know that funding is an issue, but it also compels us to look at how we use our dollars more smartly. And this is where I will tell you, without any enhanced resources, if I can find, as your state controller, $7.3 billion with a B in wasteful spending, because we're just a big apparatus called state government, it's nobody's fault, but there is going to be waste. Let's take that waste and direct it to what we need to do in terms of meeting the top needs of California.
We'll actually open the floor. If anybody has, this is the Q&A session. We'll take questions both in person and if you can speak up loudly too.
Hi, my name is Isabel. I had kind of a little bit of like a two-part longer question for you. You mentioned that you wanted to change the perception of women in politics. As we know, like we experience gender political socialization where girls are, from a young age told, oh, politics for men, politics for
Right.
boys, male dominated. Why would you want to do that? I was wondering how you were elected as governor in 2026. You would work to increase the social, political, and economic standing of women in California, and then especially in respect to women of color.
Yeah, great question. So, one of the issues around equity, well, let me just say this. We talk, any issue that you talk about in California, I think is always tied to the economy of California. We're a global economy. We are the 5th largest economy in the world, soon to be 6th, unfortunately. And our GDP has actually gone down a bit, or hasn't been growing as robustly. But tying it back to where, particularly for communities of color, understanding that we have had a history of disinvestment in those communities. And so how do we look at, and I'll just take an area that I'm particularly passionate about, climate change. So we know that environmental policies over the course of our history here in California has hurt poor communities and communities of color the most. Well-intentioned policies that have actually met the goals, but they've only met their goals because the burdens have been shifted to other communities. Now, that's a lot to unpack, but it's not insurmountable in terms of what we do going forward. We know that the climate impacts that we're going to be seeing, whether it's sea level rise, whether it's extreme heat, whether it's drought, whatever the issue is going to hit poor communities and communities of color the most. And so how do we make climate investments with a priority towards those communities that have been disproportionately affected? And how do we really focus on, as part of that, funding that will help communities really see not just environmental benefits, but economic benefits as well? And so when I look at climate, when I look at the whole area of climate technology, whether it relates to water, whether it relates to food production, whatever it is, like where are those opportunities? Where can those opportunities reside? And so when I look at investments, they have to be place-based, and they also have to be based on just those communities that have really shouldered the biggest impacts. And I know that people, when I talk about it this way, the first thing people say to me is, "Oh, we have an affirmative action ban in our Constitution in California." Okay, you go tell that to a family or to a community in the Central Valley, and when they turn their faucet on, have either no water or brown water coming out of their faucet. Like, what does an affirmative action ban have to do with anything? They don't have access to safe drinking water. It's a public health issue. And so I think those are the kinds of prioritization that we need to make with our dollars. And then we have to invite strict accountability as to whether those programs are working. If they're not working, we're going back to the drawing board. But they're going to work, in my mind, because we invite the people who are from those communities that are the most disproportionately affected to tell us, where do we need to make these investments? And I know this will be true. The communities that have been so ignored time after time, with just not even large-scale investments, but small-scale investments where they know how to deploy those dollars in the most effective ways, will help us turn this tide in terms of looking at the inequities that they've been burdened with over all these generations. And that has to be a priority. We talk a good game about environmental justice, but if you're for environmental justice, show it. We talk a lot about, caring about our indigenous peoples here in California. If you really care about our indigenous peoples and knowing that They probably have a lot of knowledge and wisdom about what to do with our natural environment. Invite them. I mean, it's a way of governing, it's a way of being very intentional about decision making, but also being very sanguine about the fact that with scarce dollars, you have to be smart about those dollars, that you look at the intersectionality of these issues.
And since this is a hybrid event,
Yes,
I want to also get a question from online. It says, what are a few examples of how your creativity was awarded and how did you respond? Do you ever credit this to your success?
Appreciate, yeah, absolutely. Lots of opportunities in terms of being creative in the policy space. So I would say one of the some of the accomplishments that I feel most proud of is actually in the tax arena. And Professor Chan mentioned some of this in the beginning. We had, before marriage equality became law in our nation, here in California, we were big movers and shakers with respect to recognizing same-sex couples, and marriage wasn't legal at the time. But working with the community, it was very clear that it meant a lot to them to be recognized as, a legal unit. And what way could we recognize them as legal units, as married couples, but through the tax code? And this was a complicated time, but it was also a rewarding time. I worked with the LGBTQ plus community pretty closely to enact a law that basically said, we will recognize you as married couples here in California. If you choose to file a joint income tax return, we will recognize you. You either have to be registered as domestic partners in California or have some sort of other legal recognition. So for us to do that. However, the federal government still can't recognize you. IRS still can't recognize you as being a married couple, and so you can't file jointly there. So we have this convoluted tax filing system where same-sex couples would fill out their federal return as if they were married and filing jointly, or married filing separately, either way, but married. Take their adjusted gross income from that dummy federal return. I can tell you as a tax official, saying dummy federal returns sounds really awful, but they have to do that to get their AGI transferred to their state return, and then they could actually file as married with married status for state purposes, and then go back and file their returns with the federal government as single people. It was awful. And most of the time, LGBTQ plus couples, and actually those raising families, ended up paying more taxes than not under that regime. But they felt it was important to do so just to get the legal recognition. And how courageous of them to do that. So yes, if they were willing to stand up to do that, I was going to help them do that. And so we got the laws enacted, and luckily, and thank goodness, Judge Ron Walker, in the beginning of some of these Prop 8 marriage equality cases, cited what California had done, that we were trying to close like the economic inequities, right? And so we did that not just for income tax, but for property taxes as well. We have same-sex couples owning property together. If one should predecease the other, the surviving spouse would have had to be reassessed for that other half of the property. So unfair, so unfair. So we changed that law too. But the laws were convoluted because the feds still weren't recognizing them, and we didn't want to hurt anybody financially, but the community wanted it. And it was just a beautiful thing because it was, in my mind, just something that was so responsive to, how a tax code should be. Really recognizing that people are living differently, they're raising families differently, their, family units look different. And this is every part about being a public official is like, don't try to fit a square peg in a round hole and think that is going to help people. It actually is going to hurt them in the long run. Recognize people for who they are and understand that, their needs are now very different from when the tax code first came into existence in the 1930s.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time. So I want to go ahead and just end the event by saying thank you again to you, Betty Yee, for showing up in this space to answer our questions and just all the incredible work that you're doing in terms of bringing it greater attention and awareness to Asian American women in politics and women in general. And then I also wanted to say a special thanks to our moderators as well, political science, Professor Betty Chan, and then our student Senate President and Trustee Jocelyn, as well as our Ease Club co-founder, Johanna Vu. And then also the East Club members, I want to make sure to give a shout out for helping with the sign in. Also the ASSC team, as well as the NFPZ team, for just all the event logistics that come into like an hour and 20 minutes of the behind the scenes. I just want to wish you the best, and also just thank you to all of you that showed up here in person as well as online in the virtual space. And I just wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. And I don't know if we can actually have a little time afterwards. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wasting my time if I didn't ask you this question. I just got off my club meeting with Green Club. I'm Jose Rubio. I'm also certified president-elect. And I like to ask you this question because, first of all, I like to appreciate both Jocelyn and Johanna for the work they do for the gamers and document students.
Yeah.
Myself, and the question I get asked frequently, in which I got asked today, Jose, this is a student working for, his name is Laura, and she's a mother. She doesn't work, she doesn't have documents, but she doesn't qualify for the California Green Light Incentive Grant Program. But for those that do, the program is not meant to fit our needs, because even if we put in hours and get a stipend at the end of $2,250, it's not a realistic stipend that will help you carry out your needs and expenses throughout the semester. How can we help students who are undocumented or being qualified for this program, or who don't? How can we get them on board to get a real life experience? Because something that Dora mentioned to me, she said, Jose, I wish I had some real life experience of what it's like going to an interview. I said, well, there's a mock interview. What's the success rate? He's like, it's not the same. He's like, I feel like I'm not bringing up my family. And you would be a great example of bringing empowerment to women, especially in our community.
Yeah.
So my question is, how can you as governor extend that help to people who feel like they're not seeing the kind of accessibility to them? And when I see Dora, who's a mother, she also has children in college and university level, she's not able to. She doesn't feel like she's independent.
Yeah.
So bringing that sense of independence to the student. I also am undocumented, and I know what it's like to not be able to receive a check until the other semester because it's not actual work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's enough information about that question.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. Everything you've described, we can fix. I'll just say that first off. Sometimes a lot of these policies, I think, I have a saying that unfortunately, I'm saying a lot more now. That is, sometimes we just have to get out of our own way. We put up so many hurdles, and yet, the very objective we're trying to achieve isn't attainable. And so I think a lot of what you've described can easily be changed, right? And I'm not even sure that it necessarily requires a law. I'll just say that. It may just be an issue that could be addressed by, a governing board, or, but it does speak to something that I think is kind of a key factor. And that is, oftentimes when these kinds of barriers are in place, I think people tend to get cynical about, why are they in place, right? I don't think in this case, and because this has become so politicized in terms of, how we serve DACA students and maybe 540 students, and it just happened actually with the regents about being able to employ DACA students, which I thought the regents did not make a good decision. And there was a lot of legal, support for them to do otherwise. But all to say that if we are meant to have, kind of inclusive learning spaces, if we are meant to have a place in California where everybody belongs and really are extending opportunities to everyone, we have to make these processes work. They can't be barriers. I mean, this is like a process thing. It's not even like a law, right? And so we can fix it. We can fix it. There's no reason for that. It reminds me of something that I did in the tax arena, where we have people who we have in California earned income tax credits, so you don't actually need to file a tax return to be able to claim it. If you meet the income threshold requirements, you can claim it. But again, a lot of people don't know about it. But that's our job. That's our job, right? I mean, our job is to increase awareness. Our job is to get people connected to things that are going to be resources that will help them, services that are going to help them. And our job is to be sure that everybody is thriving in the environment and space where they are. And something like that, I tell you, just makes me angry. Makes me angry.
Should we end here? And I don't know if anybody wants to. I just do you want to take?
I wanted to ask one question for you. I know you used the word resilience in your life. Did you feel like you needed to be more resilient in your political career or your upbringing?
Definitely my upbringing. Yeah. When you grow up with very little means, you really think a lot about, just what your future looks like. And the one thing I will say is you also learn how to be very resourceful. And so I think part of resilience is about, really taking advantage of, taking the benefit of all the resources around you and creating new ones. But it does compel you to think about the long term in a way that I don't think a lot of people do. And so, and now with everything kind of challenging us, I will say that, just dealing with the effects of climate change, yeah, there's kind of that kind of resilience, but we experienced a pandemic together. It won't be the last pandemic we'll experience together. So I think resilience, we're going to be tested on that a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for answering.